For those of you that came to Micromobility America in September, you probably heard the three of our entities talk about the same concept, but we're doing it again here in a little bit more granular manner. So we want to talk about how three different parties of data technology, insurance, and legal can come together to represent a good risk management package for the micromobility space, and something that we've been doing for quite some time, and it's been a very effective tool for us. So we want to kind of discuss all the components that go into risk management. One of those is obviously claims. The other is data, and then obviously placing the submission, getting the submission into the market is kind of a encapsulation of both of those. So one of the most important things to control your premium is controlling your claims, and controlling your claims is a process that Christy Menon over at Nilan Johnson is really great at. Christy, do you want to explain just a little bit on how you get involved into the micromobility space when a new claim happens, and how you interact with the insurance company?
Yeah, absolutely. What we have found is that there are huge benefits to partnering with the insurance company and developing a model that's different than the conventional way of doing things. So the way that my law firm works is, first off, we specialize in the micromobility industry. So the clients that we represent really span from startups all the way to, much more established companies. And what we do is get involved very early, understand what the legal claim is or what the customer complaint is, and then come up with an action plan to use our product knowledge to get to the best result possible. And oftentimes we can actually convince the plaintiff's attorney on the other side to completely dismiss the case. So that's essentially what our goal is to get rid of the case or minimize litigation, and then keep the insurance premiums down.
Yeah, so it kind of works like a domino. You're good. I see that Eric's volume is working.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We got this.
Eric, I'll hand it off to you in a second here. So obviously Christy and her team are on the front end. They're seeing what's happening. It's a reactive sort of position. So we have in the insurance space, we want to be both reactive and proactive. Accidents happen. We can't do anything about a lot of them, but a lot of them, as a fleet operator or a product manufacturer, whatever it might be, there's control from before the accident starts to happen. And that's why we want to talk about the data and the capabilities of our platform here with Connected Insurance, and how they use your data to be proactive in stopping these accidents from happening. Eric.
Amazing. So thank you. Happy that you hear me. I'm happy to be here. Yes, so this whole panel and this whole idea is to talk about the way that data is influencing technology, is influencing the micromobility space, and can influence insurance. What Connected Insurance does best is that we use data. Data such as the one that is aggregated by micromobility platforms, which are themselves technological companies. And with that data, we assist insurance companies and insurance carriers to better analyze and better understand the risk of these organizations. Therefore, we allow them to find better, more tailored, more suitable insurance policies, and therefore more affordable premiums for our clients.
Right. So, it kind of follows the snake again. You have the data coming in, the claims information coming in. And my job as the broker at Christensen Group is to take, the data that is reactive and the data that is proactive, put it together in a submission and deliver it to the marketplace. And, at its very basic level, if we're trying to empathize or understand what the market is looking for during that submission process, it is profit, right? So there's things that go into profit. One of the biggest things that goes into whether they're able to make profit or not is whether a policy is more or less than 100% in their combined loss ratio. So loss ratio is claims expenses, loss adjustment expenses, underwriting expenses, broker expenses, and then they need that profit. And when you put that into a pie chart, that profit is a really, really small sliver. So you got to be right on when we're talking about profit to make sure that it's there. That's why the better the data is going in, the better the ability for us to produce a quote out, or an affordable quote out, is going to benefit you. So with connected insurance, Nilan, Johnson Lewis, and Christensen Group, we have this model, this package, this team that can go to markets. And Eric, why don't you talk about connected insurance, your capabilities from a underwriting capacity standpoint, and how it all plays in together?
Of course. Thank you, Brandon. So what Connected Insurance identified when coming into the insurance world, and specifically for insuring platforms such as micromobility platforms, is that historical traditional insurance carriers are struggling today to handle the amounts of data that these companies present to them. After all, these platforms are technological companies that have, for instance, ride level data, rider level data, claims data such as Christy uses, exposure data, and a lot of analytical data that can be used in order to price your insurance premiums better. The insurance industry these days is struggling to adjust with this data. So what we see today premiums that are floated. They are too big. They're carrying buffers and buffers of risk mitigation gaps. So what happens is that insurance becomes a big barrier for a lot of micromobility marketplaces and platforms. So what Connected Insurance has done with Christensen Group as partners is we created a facility, an MGA, that allows us to better analyze the data that is coming from the micromobility platforms, and therefore offer better pricing, affordable pricing for these companies. What we do in this industry is that this industry is quoting these policies on a usage-based level. But the usage-based level, the pricing is one high price per ride. What we allow the companies that are working through our platform with Christensen and with Nilan together is the ability to segment their pricing according to their actual risk criteria, therefore take better control over the risk understanding and pay much, much less for the insurance premiums.
Right. And, there's, our job not only is delivering the data, but delivering a story, a narrative around, the client, and the data really enriches that narrative, and it enables us to do that. But what we also need in the narrative is kind of an understanding of the risk, of the insured's willingness and abilities to participate in that risk, because obviously this is a partnership. It's a package, like a four-legged stool. If you're missing one of those legs, it can be problematic for you. So the client partaking in the risk management side and getting involved with the underwriting process and being kind of that fourth leg can really deliver very positive results. And I know that, Eric, our London partners and yourselves, understanding, having that belly-to-belly relationship is of paramount importance.
Oh, I completely agree. I just flew back from our trip to our London partners from the Lloyd's market. We've agreed massively exactly what Brandon is saying here. The option of understanding the data, on one side, the claims data, but on the other side, the actual exposure data, being able to analyze it, understand the anomalies that sits behind any session and trip level data, really assists us to work hand to hand with our clients in order to better cater their needs, better answer their insurance needs, and make sure that they can grow with us from 1 year to another.
Yeah, absolutely. Luke, I saw you popping in. Just want to make sure you didn't have a question there, but otherwise I can.
No, I just had to scratch my eye. Wasn't sure to go off camera for it or not. It was not a hand raise. However, that is a very good prompt to remind people to submit questions. I know that sometimes, especially in a session like this, the audience Q&A is probably the most valuable part. So I'm imagining the people who are here probably have lots of questions about, how they should structure their insurance, how they can mitigate the risk, how they can, create kind of a full package of coverage, and that includes legal and technology. So if you do have questions, please do drop them in the Q&A section or the chat, and we will get to them afterward. So please continue, Brandon.
Okay. So back to the legal side and how this kind of all meshes together. Having a national counsel as part of the package, one dedicated law firm that's able to handle claims wherever they come in, as opposed to what has been very normalized in the insurance industry is having panel counsel in whatever jurisdiction the case is in. But that panel counsel might not be very well equipped to handle a micromobility claim. So we've always found that expertise trumps locality and geography, which is why we are very thrilled and excited to have Nilan Johnson and Christy's team doing that. But Christy, maybe just talk about how having a national counsel program quickly can really impact efficiencies and therefore impact claims reserves and costs that the insurance company would otherwise mark as unprofitable, if you can get that to be profitable.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. As Brandon just mentioned, the conventional model is that when a lawsuit is filed, the insurance company will assign an adjuster, and then that adjuster will find an attorney, usually in just whatever state the lawsuit was filed. Now, that attorney doesn't necessarily, and often usually doesn't, have any expertise in the product itself. So they don't know anything about the micromobility product that you've built and manufactured and sold. So they're going to start working on the case, but it's going to take an incredible amount of company resources, because they're going to have to call you and ask about the business and the product background. They're going to ask you for documents. It's going to suck up a lot of the company's time. So what we did is we developed our own unique model, which essentially means that we have a core team of people in our office who are dedicated to learning the business and the product. And we do all of that on our own dime, because we're very interested in being invested and it being a long-term partnership. And what we then do is ensure that there are all sorts of efficiencies. So rather than ever having to call, a second, third, fourth time for every new legal claim, you only have to do it once. And we then use that product knowledge to essentially tell the company's story. The deep knowledge of the product is obviously the biggest advantage in defending the case. And so we use that along with the people internally to develop a company story that will help us get the result, that is the very best, whether that's getting the case kicked completely or resolving for a low amount. And the reason this is so important is that a lot of times I've seen, especially with newer clients, they secure insurance and then they just, decide to follow the normal process. What can happen is that if you have an attorney who doesn't know your product and they're instead focused on maybe the injuries that the rider got, what can happen is you could have a settlement for a very, very high amount. I've seen $1 million be paid out, for example, in a case that was worth $10,000. And the problem with that from the insurance standpoint, of course, is that those are numbers that are going to stick with your company forever. So the loss runs will be reviewed, they'll be considered, and then that'll be taken into account when you figure out the future premiums. So trying to get a core legal team who's invested in your product, connected with you early on is extremely important, and we've seen a lot of success with it.
Luke, it looks like we're ending our time here. I want to be sensitive, but obviously this whole thing is like a puzzle and fits together into this program where we can then offer the insured policy.
Yeah, by all means, keep going. I think you guys I'm learning a lot. Unfortunately, I do have to go to my next session, but I want you guys to stay here and get as much time in as you can. I see a lot of questions now coming into the audience Q&A, so maybe you can pivot over there at some point and take care of those. But again, I just want to say thank you all for being here. Please continue to use this time and space to chat more. We'll have more content going on in the sessions tab throughout the rest of the day, which is almost over actually. But for now, thank you all. Brandon, Christy, Eric, had a great conversation. Looking forward to seeing you in person in one of our next events.
Sounds good. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, Luke. I'll go through the questions here. Looks like insuring assets such as e-mopeds is, as said, pretty expensive, putting pressure on the business model. Would it make sense to divide the stationary risk and the usage risk? I think I understand that question. I mean, generally, it's not super efficient to separate risks if they fall on the same coverage line. Having two policies is usually not as efficient as having one, but you can potentially do it in certain situations where the risk, the contrast is just very, very different. Is there data regarding injuries for e-mobility? I mean, I don't think there's great data. There's different sources of data, and maybe Eric dropped off. The CPSC has data on accidents. The kind of OSHA has a variety of data, on accidents, but there's no great central database. I mean, Christy, I know your firm can do jury verdict research and claim research and things like that, but other than that, I think it's kind of hit and miss.
Right. I mean, it's something we do focus on when we defend cases, because we're always talking about the users the misuse of the product, and always pointing out that you assume the risk when you engage in certain recreational activities, and we'll often use the data to help us, just to show, listen, people fall all the time, and the fact that there's a fall or somebody gets hurt doesn't mean that there's a defect with the product. So it certainly can come into play.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Let's see. Other than that, what technologies are micromobility insurance companies most interested in to help bound the theft risk? You know what? It's a good question. However, for the most part, theft is very hard to insure because the values of these units are, from $500 to $2,500. Most deductibles are going to be more than that. So it is hard to insure these when they're out in the ether. It's easier to insure them when they're all in one place or in your care, custody, and control. So we don't have a lot of people that we see insuring the theft because it would be very hard to write a policy that would make sense. Can you speak to the risk of lithium battery fires for bike parking facilities and also for bike shops? Yeah, I mean, Christy, I don't know about you, the most that I've seen are storing batteries in warehouses and things along that nature, which prevent a large fire hazard, both bodily injury and property damage. So I don't know if you've seen anything different with the battery claims, Christy.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a hot button issue right now. I think the current administration at the Consumer Product Safety Committee is, they've come out sort of guns blazing and, are very clear that they are intent on enforcement. So I think that any sort of thermal issue, of course, including fires, needs to be on folks' radar, because from a regulatory standpoint, if you are selling or distributing or otherwise in the chain of custody with any sort of lithium-ion battery products, you do have to consider your obligations to report any sort of known issues. So we do a lot of work training or providing advice on how do you document things, how do you store things, what measures should you take to make sure you don't get in the crosshairs with the CPSC. And I'd be happy, I know we're getting questions here, but hopefully they've shared our contact information. I'd be happy to take follow-ups too on that one or others.
How can third-party technology suppliers partner with insurers to operate to solve the issue of lack of safety and accident data? It's a good question. I think, I'd assume the defense bar has been wanting some sort of data accident aggregator for a long time, Christy, finding ways to get all the, the EMS medical data direct from the accident scene, CPSC data, put it all into one spot.
Yeah, typically we just, in the course of investigating any particular incident, we do a really thorough job to collect all of that stuff. And again, try to do it as early as possible to try to wrap things up, given that when things get into litigation, it's crazy expensive. So we try to minimize that.
Yeah, some of the best data comes from, the ambulance, report, because they'll get a very thorough description of what happened and how it happened, and can be a good source of data for both sides of it, generally speaking.
Yeah, and as more and more like micromobility companies in particular are using apps with their products, one thing that we have done is started doing mobile phone inspections and actually doing forensic evaluations and then using the data from that to help defend the case, which has been a really interesting development. And, again, there's not a lot of people who are really specialized in that area or sort of focused on the extraction. It's not something that was traditionally used in defending product liability cases.
Well, don't see any other questions. Yeah. Here, I'll put for those of you that want to send me an email. There's that. And obviously reach out to Luke at any time too, if you want to get a hold of us and can't. So any other questions? Let's see, retailers are requiring certification. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely more in the way of standards and requirements for batteries and the physical mechanical frame itself. I think we're going to see more and more of that will help as well. So
yeah, and just from the legal perspective on Greg's comment there, his question, one of the things that we always advise clients of is as they're developing a new model, new product, whatever, think about putting together a testing or a certification package. A great time to do that is when you're still in the design and, the early sort of production phase, because it gives you an opportunity to decide what you should keep and maybe what you shouldn't keep and make some strategic decisions about that. Those are really helpful packages to have in the event that you ever get a legal claim. So.
All right. Well, sounds great. Well, thank you for the opportunity. Christy, good to see you.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone.